Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win by Jocko, Willink, and Leif Babin. Leadership decides everything. No excuses, no explanations, no shifting blame. If something fails under your watch, it's your fault. This book is not about theory. It's about reality. Hard lessons learned in war and applied to business and life. Jocko, Willink, and Leif Babin, two highly decorated Navy SEAL officers, took lessons forged in the chaos of battle and translated them into a leadership philosophy that applies anywhere. Whether you're leading a business, a team, or just yourself, the battlefield is unforgiving, and so is life. If you refuse to take ownership, you will lose. The best leaders eliminate excuses, take responsibility for everything in their sphere, and never allow their ego to cloud judgment. You don't get to pick and choose what you own. You own it all. That is extreme ownership, and it changes everything. Lesson 1. Own everything. In 2012, in the unforgiving streets of Iraq, a Navy SEAL team found itself in the middle of a devastating friendly fire incident. Chaos erupted, miscommunication spread like wildfire, and bullets flew between men who were supposed to be allies. The consequences could have shattered the unit's morale, ignited blame, and triggered endless finger-pointing. Jocko Willink, the commander in charge, had a choice. He could have blamed faulty intelligence, stressed-out operators, or ambiguous orders from higher-ups. He could have sought refuge in excuses, justifying why the mistake happened and how others had contributed to it. Instead, he did what true leaders do. He took the hit. He stood in front of his men and owned the failure completely. No matter how many external factors played a role, the responsibility was his alone. That moment defined him, not just as a leader in war, but as a model for leadership everywhere. The power of extreme ownership lies in what it creates: a culture of accountability, trust, and relentless improvement. Contrast that with the disaster of Enron, a company that crumbled under the weight of denial and deception. Instead of owning their mismanagement, executives manipulated financial reports, deflected responsibility, and created an illusion of success while reality deteriorated. When the walls caved in, they pointed fingers, distanced themselves from wrongdoing, and watched their empire collapse in disgrace. The difference between Jocko Willink and Enron's leadership is the difference between a person who builds resilience and a person who breeds dysfunction. When leaders refuse to own their failures, they set a precedent that ripples through their organizations. Problems get buried instead of solved, trust erodes, and disaster becomes inevitable. This principle isn't just about business or war. It applies to every area of life. Consider Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, who in 2009 safely landed U.S. Airways Flight 1549 on the Hudson River after both engines failed. It would have been easy to blame the birds that struck the plane or claim that survival was out of his hands. Instead, he took total responsibility, made split-second decisions, and saved every life on board. His ownership of the situation turned what could have been a tragedy into a miracle. Compare that to leaders who, in times of crisis, hide behind bureaucracy, blame their teams, or wait for someone else to step up. One takes control of reality and bends it in their favor. The other becomes a victim of it. Extreme ownership isn't about guilt, it's about control. The moment you blame external forces, your team, the economy, the system, you surrender your ability to change the outcome. The best CEOs, the most effective politicians, the greatest athletes all embody this principle. Elon Musk didn't build Tesla by blaming oil companies or regulatory hurdles. He took ownership of every failure, adjusted relentlessly, and drove his vision forward. Michael Jordan didn't blame his teammates when the Bulls lost. He trained harder, demanded more from himself, and led by example. In contrast, leaders who fail, whether in politics, business, or sports, usually have one thing in common: a refusal to own their mistakes. Extreme ownership doesn't mean you absorb blame for the sake of it. It means you recognize that every problem in your domain is ultimately your responsibility. If your team is underperforming, it's on you to set a clearer vision, train them better, and fix inefficiencies. If your business is failing, it's on you to innovate, adapt, and push forward. If your personal life is a mess, it's on you to make the tough decisions, change your habits, and regain control. Ownership means you never wait for someone else to fix things. You don't make excuses. You take action. The greatest battles, whether in war, business, or life, are won by those who refuse to blame external forces. No one owes you an easy path. No one will rescue you. You step up, you own everything in your world, and you execute. If you don't, someone else will, and they will win. Lesson 2. No bad teams, only bad leaders. SEAL training is a brutal test of endurance, teamwork, and leadership. One of its most grueling exercises pits small teams against each other in relentless boat races through freezing surf. The waves punish every mistake, and exhaustion magnifies every flaw. In one of these exercises, the difference between the best and worst teams seemed obvious. One team dominated every race, while another struggled, coming in last nearly every time. The struggling team fought amongst themselves, blamed one another, and resigned themselves to failure. The instructors decided to intervene, not by replacing the team members, but by swapping the leaders. Almost instantly, the transformation was undeniable. The team that had been losing suddenly started winning. Same boats, same conditions, same men. The only difference was a leader who refused to accept failure. A bad leader looks at a struggling team and points fingers. A great leader looks at the same team and finds solutions. When the new leader took over the failing team, he did not accept their excuses. He didn't let them believe they were victims of circumstances. Instead, he changed their mindset. He set expectations. He made them believe they could win. He instilled discipline and forced them to function as a unit rather than a collection of individuals. The shift wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Once they saw what was possible, they proved themselves capable of it. Leadership is the force multiplier that turns weak teams into strong ones. History is littered with examples of leaders who turned impossible situations around not by replacing their teams, but by demanding excellence. When Apollo 13 suffered a near-fatal explosion in space, NASA's mission control faced an insurmountable challenge. The astronauts were stranded in a damaged spacecraft with limited oxygen and power. Every technical expert involved had a reason to panic. But Gene Kranz, the flight director, refused to accept failure. He famously declared, "Failure is not an option." He set the tone. He demanded creativity, adaptability, and absolute focus. The engineers responded by working relentlessly, testing solutions, and eventually guiding the astronauts home safely. Under a weak leader, the situation would have crumbled into despair and resignation. Under a great leader, people performed at their absolute best. Contrast this with organizations that have failed spectacularly due to weak leadership. When Kodak collapsed despite having invented the first digital camera, it wasn't because its employees lacked intelligence or creativity. It was because leadership refused to embrace change. When the 2008 financial crisis exposed massive fraud at Lehman Brothers, the problem wasn't the employees. It was the toxic leadership culture that rewarded recklessness and deception. The failure of teams almost always traces back to leadership. A failing culture, an uninspired workforce, a struggling business. These are symptoms of weak leadership at the top. The best leaders inspire, train, and extract the maximum potential from those they lead. They set standards and enforce discipline. They make their people believe they can win, and then they ensure they do. If you are a leader, you do not have the luxury of blaming your team. If they are underperforming, it is because you have not set the right expectations. If they lack discipline, it is because you have not instilled it. If they lack motivation, it is because you have not inspired them. Weak leaders hide behind excuses and complain about their teams. Strong leaders transform them. The next time you face a failing team, whether in business, sports, or any aspect of life, look in the mirror. Ask yourself if you have truly led them or if you have allowed them to remain weak. Have you set a clear vision? Have you demanded excellence? Have you refused to accept mediocrity? No team is permanently bad. The only question is whether the leader is willing to do what it takes to change them. If your team is failing, the problem is not them. The problem is you. Lesson 4. Check your ego. Ego destroys leaders. It blinds you to reality, makes you defensive, and prevents you from admitting mistakes. It is the silent killer of great teams, the barrier between potential and success. In the high-stakes environment of war, where mistakes cost lives, unchecked ego is lethal. During an operation in Ramadi, a young SEAL officer challenged Jocko Willink's plan, convinced that his own approach was superior. In many leadership cultures, especially in high-pressure, hierarchical environments, such defiance would have been shut down instantly. The leader's authority would have taken priority over reason. But that's not how great leadership works. Instead of asserting dominance, Willink listened. He evaluated the young officer's points, adjusted the plan, and made it better. His mission was not to prove he was right. It was to win. And winning requires stripping away ego, detaching from personal pride, and making decisions based on what serves the mission, not what serves the leader's reputation. Contrast this with the infamous arrogance of Captain Edward Smith, the man who commanded the Titanic. He received multiple warnings about icebergs, yet his overconfidence in his ship's invincibility led him to ignore them. He maintained full speed, believing nothing could go wrong, believing he didn't need to adjust course. His ego not only cost him his ship, but doomed over 1,500 lives. His refusal to accept that he could be wrong, his inability to acknowledge the risk, led to one of the greatest maritime disasters in history. Ego is not just a personal flaw, it is a leadership failure that can have catastrophic consequences. The best leaders check their egos at the door. They don't need to be the smartest person in the room. They surround themselves with people who challenge them, who push back, who offer better solutions. Abraham Lincoln understood this when he filled his cabinet with strong-willed, opposing voices, his so-called team of rivals. He didn't choose weak, obedient advisors who would tell him what he wanted to hear. He wanted people who would challenge his thinking, force him to see blind spots, and refine his decisions. He valued results over personal validation, and that's what made him one of history's greatest leaders. Ego destroys progress in every field. It's why companies crumble under poor leadership. Blockbuster refused to pivot to streaming because executives were too proud to admit that the market was changing. Their ego convinced them that their dominance was permanent. Meanwhile, Netflix constantly adapted, challenged its own models, and grew into an industry giant. The difference was not technology, it was humility versus arrogance. The same pattern repeats in politics, sports, and business. Muhammad Ali, despite his confidence, trained relentlessly and never assumed he had nothing left to learn. In contrast, Mike Tyson, at the peak of his career, let his ego convince him he was untouchable, stopped training seriously, and suffered one of boxing's most shocking upsets against Buster Douglas. The difference between continued success and sudden downfall often comes down to one thing: whether you control your ego or your ego controls you. Checking your ego doesn't mean lacking confidence. It means having the humility to recognize that you don't have all the answers, that your team's input matters, and that learning never stops. The best leaders detach from personal pride and focus on the mission. If a team member presents a better plan, implement it. If someone gives you feedback, listen instead of defending yourself. If you make a mistake, own it instead of justifying it. Weak leaders protect their egos at all costs. Strong leaders protect their teams, their organizations, and their missions by staying humble and adaptable. Drop the need to be right, accept feedback, improve constantly. If your ego dictates your decisions, it will destroy you. Lesson 5. Cover and move. SEAL teams live and die by a principle called cover and move. It's a combat tactic as old as warfare itself. One unit lays down suppressive fire while the other advances, ensuring the team moves together as a coordinated force. Without it, chaos reigns. If one group moves without support, they become vulnerable. If one element fails to provide cover, the entire team is exposed. This principle is not just about surviving a gunfight. It's about leadership, teamwork, and how organizations thrive or collapse. The battlefield offers no room for selfishness, and neither does business, sports, or any high-performing environment. In one mission, SEALs were tasked with clearing an area under heavy enemy fire. They depended on a supporting unit for cover, but a miscommunication nearly turned the mission into a disaster. The supporting element, uncertain of the clearing team's exact position, hesitated. The clearing team advanced without full cover, exposing them to enemy fire. It could have unraveled completely, but instead of blaming each other for the breakdown, the units quickly realigned, improved coordination, and adapted on the fly. The mission was completed successfully because the team understood the bigger picture. The goal was not individual success, it was collective victory. Contrast that with organizations that fail because they lack this principle. When Blockbuster had the opportunity to acquire Netflix for $50 million, it refused, believing its business model was untouchable. Blockbuster executives dismissed Netflix as a niche service, failing to see that collaboration, whether through acquisition or adaptation, was the only way forward. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. Netflix had moved forward, and Blockbuster had been left exposed. Arrogance and isolation cost them everything. Businesses that succeed understand cover and move at the organizational level. They break down silos, ensure departments work in sync, and prioritize collective success over internal competition. This principle applies to leadership at every level. The best leaders foster unity, ensuring that every piece of the team supports the others. When NASA engineers worked to bring Apollo 13's crew home after an explosion in space, no single individual could solve the crisis alone. Flight Director Gene Kranz led a team where every expert played a role, each supporting the others in real time. One team worked on stabilizing oxygen levels, another calculated re-entry angles, and another improvised a carbon dioxide filter using only the materials available on board. If they had operated in silos, the mission would have ended in tragedy. Instead, through cover and move, they saved 3 lives and achieved one of NASA's greatest triumphs. Ego and self-interest are the enemies of this principle. Teams that refuse to support each other fail. Leaders who hoard information, undermine coworkers, or refuse to collaborate weaken their organizations. The same thing happens in sports. Basketball teams dominated by individual superstars who don't share the ball rarely win championships. The greatest teams, whether it's the Chicago Bulls under Phil Jackson or the Golden State Warriors in their prime, succeed because their players understand that winning is not about individual stats, but about how well they function together. The military, business, and sports all reinforce the same truth. If you don't work as a unit, you will fail. Cover and move is more than a strategy. It's a mindset. It means you don't leave teammates to struggle alone. You don't let different divisions within your company compete instead of cooperate. You don't prioritize personal recognition over team success. If you want to win, you must ensure that everyone around you is winning too. The best leaders align their teams, remove obstacles to collaboration, and reinforce the idea that success is a shared mission. You cannot win alone. If you act like you can, you will lose. Cover and move, support and advance. That's how teams win. Lesson 6, keep it simple. Complexity is the enemy of execution. Plans with too many layers, too many contingencies, and too many moving parts collapse under pressure. In combat, confusion is deadly. In business, it breeds inefficiency. In leadership, it creates hesitation and failure. The best leaders strip away unnecessary complications, ensuring that everyone understands the mission and can execute without hesitation. Simple plans don't mean weak plans. They mean clarity, focus, and the ability to adapt in real time. During an operation in Ramadi, Jocko Willink and his team faced a near-disastrous situation because of an overly complicated strategy. The mission plan contained too many elements, relied on too many variables, and demanded precision from too many different units at once. As the operation unfolded, uncertainty crept in. Communication broke down. The team was in danger of failing, not because of lack of skill, firepower, or determination, but because the plan itself was too convoluted. Recognizing this, Willink and his leadership team stripped the plan down to its core. They focused on clear objectives and simple execution. The result? Immediate improvement and a successful mission. This principle applies everywhere. The world's most successful companies thrive on simplicity. Apple didn't revolutionize technology by making it more complicated. It did the opposite. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was drowning in complexity. Too many products, too many ideas, no clear focus. Jobs simplified everything. He cut product lines, streamlined operations, and made simplicity the foundation of Apple's philosophy. The result? A tech empire built on intuitive design, easy-to-use interfaces, and products that anyone could understand instantly. Compare that to companies that fail, organizations burdened by bureaucratic complexity, confusing strategies, and indecisive leadership. Amazon operates on the same principle. It dominates the retail world because Jeff Bezos focused relentlessly on making purchasing seamless. One-click ordering, fast delivery, and minimal friction in the buying process, all designed to keep things simple for the customer. Complexity slows things down. It forces people to stop and think when they should be acting. Great leaders eliminate confusion by ensuring that every process, every decision, and every directive is easy to understand and execute. History is full of examples of leaders who failed because they let complexity take over. The Vietnam War became a disaster for the United States, not because of a lack of military strength, but because leadership layered the strategy with bureaucracy, unclear objectives, and political overreach. Troops on the ground lacked a simple, clear goal. The war became unwinnable because it was never communicated in a way that could be executed decisively. Contrast that with the invasion of Normandy in World War II, one of the most complex military operations ever attempted. Yet based on a brutally simple principle, land, establish a foothold, and push forward. Every soldier knew the mission. Simple doesn't mean easy, but it does mean clear. As a leader, you are responsible for ensuring that your team doesn't drown in confusion. If your people constantly ask for clarification, your plan is too complicated. If they hesitate because they're uncertain about priorities, you haven't simplified the mission enough. Complexity leads to wasted time, unnecessary mistakes, and loss of momentum. The best leaders know that clarity equals speed. Speed equals effectiveness. Simplify, communicate, execute. Break things down to their essentials. Eliminate unnecessary steps, unnecessary rules, and unnecessary decisions. If your plan requires an elaborate explanation, it's already flawed. Keep it simple, and you'll win. Lesson 7, prioritize and execute. When bullets fly, when the pressure mounts, when the situation spirals into chaos, weak leaders freeze. They panic, try to solve everything at once, and end up solving nothing. The best leaders do the opposite. They remain calm, detach from the chaos, and zero in on the single most important problem. They solve that first, then move to the next. Prioritization isn't just about knowing what matters. It's about having the discipline to ignore everything else until the critical objective is achieved. In a firefight in Ramadi, Jocko, Willink, and his SEAL team found themselves pinned down, exposed, and dangerously low on ammunition. There were 100 things that could have demanded their attention: the enemy's position, their dwindling ammo, the need for reinforcements, the lack of communication. But Willink didn't let the chaos dictate his actions. He focused on one thing: getting to cover. Without cover, nothing else mattered. If they stayed exposed, they wouldn't live long enough to solve any other problems. Once they secured cover, they could reassess, reload, and counterattack. That single act, prioritizing and executing, turned a no-win situation into a successful operation. This principle isn't just for war, it applies everywhere. In 1970, when an oxygen tank exploded on Apollo 13, the spacecraft instantly transformed from a moon mission into a life-or-death crisis. The crew was losing oxygen. Their power was failing. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. Mission control could have been paralyzed by the sheer number of emergencies. But under the leadership of Gene Kranz, they did what great leaders do. They prioritized. First, stabilize life support. Then, manage power consumption. Then, calculate a return trajectory. One thing at a time. That relentless focus saved 3 astronauts from certain death. Had they attempted to fix everything at once, they would have fixed nothing. Weak leaders don't prioritize. They react. They allow pressure to dictate their decisions, jumping from one issue to another without a clear plan. That's why struggling businesses make panicked decisions, trying to overhaul everything instead of fixing the one thing that's actually breaking them. That's why athletes who get overwhelmed by a bad start let one mistake snowball into a losing performance. The great ones reset, focus, and attack the most immediate problem first. Look at how Steve Jobs turned Apple around when he returned in 1997. The company was failing, bleeding cash, and drowning in over 350 different products. Most leaders would have tried to fix everything at once. Cut costs here, tweak marketing there, reorganize teams. Jobs did the opposite. He simplified. He identified the single biggest problem. Apple had lost its focus. He slashed the product line to just a handful of key offerings. One move, one priority, changed everything. The company stabilized, then innovated, then dominated. That's prioritization in action. Leaders who lack this skill fail in moments of pressure. The captain of the Titanic, instead of prioritizing evacuation and damage control, hesitated, wasting critical time. When Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, their executives scrambled, trying to fix everything at once rather than focusing on what could have saved them. The difference between success and failure in crisis isn't resources, luck, or intelligence. It's the ability to step back, cut through the noise, and tackle the right problem first. When you're overwhelmed, do not try to fix everything. Step back, take a breath, identify the critical issue that, if not handled, makes everything else irrelevant. Solve it, then move to the next. This is the process that wins wars, saves lives, builds businesses, and keeps leaders in control when everything else is spiraling. Prioritize and execute every time. Lesson 8, discipline equals freedom. Most people believe discipline is restrictive. They think rules, routines, and structure limit their ability to do what they want. The truth is the opposite. Discipline is the key to freedom. It is not a cage. It is the foundation that allows you to control your own life. Without discipline, you are a slave to chaos, procrastination, and weakness. With it, you have the power to dictate your future. SEALs wake up at 4:30 a.m., train relentlessly, and maintain the highest physical and mental standards. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because discipline creates options. The more disciplined you are, the more choices you have. The more disciplined you are, the more freedom you earn. Jocko Willink follows a brutal routine of waking up before dawn, training every day, and keeping every aspect of his life in order. Why? Because it allows him to operate at the highest level. There is no wasted energy, no uncertainty, no scrambling to catch up. Everything is intentional. When you master time management, you gain more time. When you control your finances, you gain financial freedom. When you stay in peak physical condition, you gain control over your body. Weak leaders and weak people live without discipline. They drift, react instead of act, and never build the habits that lead to victory. Look at the greatest athletes in history. Michael Jordan didn't become the greatest basketball player of all time because of talent alone. He was the first in the gym and the last to leave. Kobe Bryant shot thousands of jumpers before sunrise while his competitors were still asleep. Tom Brady's dominance in the NFL wasn't because he was the most physically gifted. It was because his discipline in training, diet, and preparation was unmatched. The best don't rely on motivation. Motivation fades. Discipline remains. The difference between the elite and everyone else is not natural ability. It's the relentless commitment to structure, preparation, and hard work. Contrast that with those who lack discipline. Athletes who relied on talent alone, who refused to train with the same intensity, burned out. Businesses that didn't maintain discipline in their operations collapsed. Lehman Brothers, once a financial giant, imploded because its leadership lacked the discipline to manage risk. Blockbuster ignored changing market trends because it was undisciplined in adapting to reality. Every failure, every collapse, every downfall in history is rooted in the absence of discipline. Discipline gives you control. Control over your schedule means you are never running late, never overwhelmed, never scrambling to catch up. Control over your health means you are not a prisoner to illness or fatigue. Control over your finances means you are not trapped in debt or forced into bad decisions. Without discipline, you are a slave to circumstance. With discipline, you own your future. People look at those who wake up early, eat clean, train hard, and grind relentlessly and think, that looks exhausting. That looks miserable. But what's truly miserable? Being weak, out of shape, struggling with finances, always reacting to problems instead of preventing them. Discipline is the path to power. It is not a punishment. It is a gift. If you want freedom, start with discipline. Lock in your habits, eliminate excuses, and take ownership of your routine. There is no shortcut. The road to victory is paved with relentless discipline. Take it. Lesson 9. Lead up and down the chain. Leadership is not a one-way street. Too many people think leadership only means guiding those below them, directing subordinates, managing teams, and enforcing structure. But real leadership moves in both directions. You don't just lead your team, you also lead your superiors. If you fail to do both, you are not truly leading. The most effective leaders influence everyone around them, regardless of rank or authority. They don't just wait for orders from above and blindly execute them. They ask questions, clarify objectives, and ensure that the mission is understood at every level. In one operation, Leif Babin's SEAL platoon struggled with unclear guidance from command. They could have done what weak leaders do: complain, blame upper management, and use poor communication as an excuse for failure. But Babin understood that leadership meant responsibility at all levels. Instead of waiting for better orders, he took action. He asked the right questions, pushed for clarity, and translated vague directives into actionable steps his team could execute. The result? Instead of confusion and hesitation, the mission moved forward with precision. This principle applies in every organization. Great corporate leaders don't just lead their teams, they also manage up, influencing those above them. Steve Jobs didn't passively follow Apple's board of directors. He convinced them to take bold risks, bet on innovation, and push Apple to the cutting edge of technology. If Jobs had simply followed orders, Apple would have remained an average company, playing it safe instead of revolutionizing the industry. The same applies to any high-performing leader. If you only lead downward, you are not leading at all. Nelson Mandela understood this better than most. While imprisoned for 27 years, he had no formal authority, yet he led both his fellow prisoners and his jailers. Instead of waiting for change, he influenced those around him. He built relationships, demonstrated unwavering principles, and gradually turned even his captors into allies. By the time he emerged from prison, he had already shaped the future of South Africa. That is leadership, moving both up and down the chain to create real impact. Weak leaders assume that if their bosses are ineffective, there is nothing they can do. They use poor leadership above them as an excuse to check out, stop trying, or shift blame. Strong leaders take ownership. If upper management is unclear, they ask better questions. If their boss is making poor decisions, they offer better solutions. If company direction is lacking, they help create clarity. Leadership is not about title or rank. It is about influence. History is filled with failures caused by people who refuse to lead up the chain. The collapse of Enron was not just because of corrupt executives. It was also because the employees and mid-level managers failed to challenge unethical decisions. The fall of Kodak wasn't just poor leadership at the top. It was a culture where innovation was stifled, and employees didn't push hard enough to challenge outdated thinking. In contrast, the greatest military victories, business successes, and political movements were led by those who understood that leadership requires influencing both directions. If you are only leading downward, you are failing. Your job is to ensure your team understands the mission, but it is also to make sure your superiors do too. You don't wait for better leadership from above. You create it. Influence everyone. Step up. Lead at all levels. Lesson 10. The dichotomy of leadership. Leadership is a constant balancing act. If you lean too far in one direction, you fail. Push your team too hard, and they break. Go too easy on them, and they become weak. Lead from the front, but don't micromanage. Be decisive, but listen to feedback. Demand excellence, but ensure your people don't burn out. Leadership is not about absolutes. It is about knowing when to adjust, when to push, and when to pull back. Fail to find that balance and you lose the trust, respect, and effectiveness of your team. In one SEAL operation, a commander drove his men relentlessly, pushing them past their limits. But he also knew exactly when to let them recover. He ensured they never became complacent, but he never let them burn out. He maintained discipline, but he also maintained morale. That balance made the difference between a team that stayed sharp and a team that collapsed under exhaustion. A weaker leader would have either pushed too hard or been too lenient. Both paths lead to failure. History is full of examples of leaders who failed because they lost this balance. Julius Caesar was one of history's greatest military strategists, a leader who inspired unmatched loyalty. But as he gained more power, he tipped too far toward control. He ignored the growing resentment in the Roman Senate, believing his authority was absolute. He stopped balancing his leadership, stopped adjusting to the changing reality, and it cost him his life. The same is true in business and war. A leader who micromanages suffocates creativity. A leader who is too hands-off creates chaos. The best leaders know when to adjust. In contrast, look at Abraham Lincoln. He led with confidence, but never arrogance. He remained close to his people, yet never lost his authority. He carried the weight of the Civil War on his shoulders, yet he never let it crush him. His ability to balance toughness with empathy, assertiveness with humility, and control with delegation made him one of the greatest leaders in history. Great leadership is a paradox. You must be aggressive, but not reckless, confident, but not arrogant, decisive, but open to new information, care about your team, but never let emotion cloud judgment. The leaders who fail at this balance either micromanage or become too detached. They either demand too much or expect too little. They either act too fast or hesitate too long. The best leaders adjust constantly. They read the situation, the team, and the mission, and they adapt. Balance is the key. There is no single formula for leadership because leadership is dynamic. You must be both strict and flexible, both driven and patient, both demanding and supportive. If you lean too far in one direction, your team will suffer. If you find the balance, they will thrive. Leadership is not about being perfect. It is about adjusting, learning, and staying in control. Get this wrong and you fail. Get it right and you win. Conclusion: extreme ownership is not just a leadership philosophy, it's a way of life. You take responsibility for everything. You eliminate excuses. You own the mission, the failures, and the results. Leaders who apply these principles win on the battlefield, in business, and in life. The lessons are simple but not easy. They require relentless discipline, humility, and the courage to take full responsibility. If you want to lead at the highest level, you must master these principles. Read the full book, internalize the mindset, and execute. Victory comes to those who own everything. The end.